You really thought this was worth our time? The words landed cold and precise, cutting through the quiet hum of the bank lobby as every head turned just enough to watch without being seen. The polished marble floors reflecting the overhead lights in long, sterile streaks, while Marcus Reed stood at the counter, one hand resting lightly against the edge as if grounding himself, his fingers steady, his posture relaxed in a way that didn't quite match the tension forming around him. The check lying flat between him and the bank manager like a question no one wanted to ask out loud. Daniel Whitmore barely glanced at it again. His expression already settled into something final, something dismissive, the kind of look that didn't come from evidence but from assumption, and somewhere behind Marcus a faint shuffle of shoes echoed, a low murmur rising and falling like distant traffic as customers leaned just a little closer, curious, cautious, waiting for something to happen, anything. And then came the small metallic click, sharp in the quiet, as Whitmore flicked open a lighter with practiced ease, the flame rising calm and controlled, a soft blue edge fading into orange as he held it just beneath the corner of the check, not rushed, not hesitant, as if this were routine, as if this moment had already been decided long before Marcus walked through the door, the paper curling almost instantly, edges blackening. The faint scent of smoke threading into the air while no one spoke, not the teller to the side, not the security guard near the glass entrance, not the woman clutching her purse 2 steps back, the entire room suspended in that fragile space between action and consequence. And Marcus didn't move, didn't reach forward, didn't protest, his gaze fixed not on the flame but on Whitmore's face, studying, measuring, as though this was the part he had been waiting for. The part that told him everything he needed to know. The fire shrinking as quickly as it had grown until the last corner of the check collapsed into ash, drifting down onto the polished surface of the counter in a soft, almost silent fall, and only then did Whitmore exhale, snapping the lighter shut with a quiet click that echoed louder than it should have. His voice calm, clipped, final as he said, "We don't process fraudulent checks here." The words delivered not as an accusation but as a conclusion, already closed, already filed away, and a faint ripple of reaction moved through the room. A few exchanged glances, a slight shake of the head, the subtle tightening of lips that suggested agreement without commitment, while Marcus remained exactly where he was, shoulders squared but loose, eyes steady, the faintest reflection of the overhead lights catching in them as he finally looked down at the small pile of ash between them. The remains of something that had held value just seconds ago, something now reduced to nothing more than residue on stone. And for a brief moment the only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning and the distant chime of the glass doors opening somewhere behind him, letting in a draft of warm afternoon air that brushed lightly across the back of his neck, carrying with it the muted noise of the street outside, cars passing, voices blending, life continuing as if nothing unusual had happened at all. And Marcus lifted his gaze again, not hurried, not forced, just deliberate, his voice quiet when it came, steady in a way that didn't match the tension still hanging in the air. "You might want to take another look at that," he said, not as a challenge, not even as a warning, but as a simple statement. And for the first time since the flame had appeared, something shifted, subtle, almost invisible, in the way Whitmore's eyes narrowed just slightly, as if trying to decide whether this was defiance or ignorance, whether it deserved correction or dismissal. And behind Marcus, someone cleared their throat, the sound too loud for the silence that followed, the moment stretching thin, fragile, waiting for the next move that would decide everything. Marcus did not repeat himself, and he did not raise his voice. He simply stood there with the same calm presence that had not shifted since the moment the flame touched the paper, his hand now resting loosely at his side, while a faint trail of gray ash spread across the counter like dust that no one wanted to claim. And for a second it seemed as though the entire lobby was waiting for him to react in a way that would justify what had just happened. Something loud, something defensive, something that would confirm every quiet assumption already forming in the room. But he gave them none of that. Instead, he glanced briefly toward the glass entrance where sunlight poured in at an angle, catching the edges of polished surfaces and turning them almost reflective, then back to Whitmore, his eyes steady, unreadable, as if this moment was not the end of something, but merely a step in a process only he fully understood. Whitmore straightened slightly behind the counter, adjusting his tie with a small, precise motion, the kind that signaled control more than comfort, and he let out a short breath through his nose, a sound that carried just enough impatience to be noticed. "Sir, I have already taken a look," he said, each word measured, clipped, practiced, "and I am not going to repeat myself," his tone firm but not raised, as though authority alone should be enough to settle the matter. Yet there was something else beneath it now, something faint, almost imperceptible, a thread of irritation that had not been there before, and Marcus tilted his head just slightly, not in challenge but in acknowledgement, his gaze dropping once more to the ash between them before lifting again. "You did not scan it," he replied quietly, his voice even, almost conversational, but the words landed differently this time, sharper, more precise, and a subtle shift moved through the space behind him as someone near the waiting chairs leaned forward, curiosity pulling them in despite themselves. Whitmore's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, the smallest break in his otherwise controlled expression, and he glanced down at the empty space where the check had been, as if confirming something he already believed to be true, then back up at Marcus. "I do not need to scan something that is clearly invalid," he said, and there it was again, that quiet certainty built not on proof but on perception, the kind that filled the silence with unspoken conclusions. Marcus nodded once, slowly, as though accepting the statement for what it was, not arguing, not pushing, just letting it exist in the air between them. And then he stepped back half a pace, creating a small distance between himself and the counter, not retreating, just repositioning, his shoulders still relaxed, his expression unchanged, the faint reflection of the overhead lights tracing the line of his cheek as he spoke again, softer this time, almost as if he were speaking more to the room than to the man in front of him. "That is the problem," he said, and the words did not carry anger, only a quiet weight that seemed to settle into the marble floor beneath them. Whitmore opened his mouth as if to respond, but paused, just for a moment, something in Marcus's tone disrupting the rhythm he had been following, and behind the counter one of the tellers shifted, her eyes flicking between the two men, uncertainty beginning to replace the earlier ease, while near the entrance the security guard adjusted his stance, not stepping forward, not stepping back, simply watching more closely now, as if sensing that the situation had not ended when the paper turned to ash, and Marcus exhaled slowly, a controlled breath that did not tremble, did not rush, then reached into the inside pocket of his jacket with an unhurried motion, the fabric brushing softly against itself as he retrieved something small and rectangular, holding it loosely between his fingers. For a second before placing it on the counter where the ash still lingered, the card resting flat, simple, unremarkable at first glance, and he slid it forward just an inch, enough for Whitmore to see without making a show of it, his voice calm, steady, unchanged as he said, "Go ahead." And for the first time since the moment began, the silence in the lobby felt different, not suspended, not passive, but expectant, as if something unseen had just shifted into place and was waiting to be recognized. Whitmore's eyes dropped to the card with visible reluctance, as if even acknowledging it required more attention than he believed it deserved, his fingers hovering for a brief moment above the surface of the counter before finally picking it up with a measured grip, the kind that suggested control but revealed just a trace of hesitation, and he glanced at it quickly at first, the same dismissive rhythm he had used before, but something in the stillness of the room slowed him down, forcing his eyes to linger a second longer than intended. Then another, the subtle tightening of his brow forming almost unconsciously as he turned the card slightly to catch the overhead light, reading more carefully now, not because he wanted to, but because something about the situation no longer felt as simple as it had just moments ago. And behind Marcus the quiet murmur that had been building faded into a sharper silence, the kind that came when people sensed a shift but could not yet name it, while the teller to the right leaned ever so slightly closer, her posture stiff, her gaze fixed on the manager's face rather than the card itself. Watching for a reaction before forming her own, Whitmore cleared his throat, a small sound that seemed louder than it should have been, and adjusted his stance, straightening his back as if posture alone could restore the authority that had begun to slip. "This does not change anything," he said, though his tone lacked the earlier certainty. The words landing with less weight than before, and Marcus did not respond immediately. He simply watched, his expression calm, patient, as if he had already seen this moment play out countless times in different forms, his silence not passive but deliberate, giving space for the realization to come on its own. Whitmore looked down again, this time more carefully, his thumb brushing lightly across the edge of the card as though searching for something he might have missed, his eyes scanning each line, each detail, the seconds stretching just enough for doubt to begin forming in the gaps between his thoughts. And then he turned slightly toward the terminal beside him, hesitating for only a fraction of a second before sliding the card across the scanner. The soft electronic beep cutting cleanly through the air, sharp and immediate, followed by a pause that felt longer than it was, the screen flickering once, twice, before stabilizing into a display that Whitmore did not expect, his eyes locking onto it as the color drained subtly from his expression, the confidence that had carried him moments ago now replaced by something quieter, something unsettled, and he leaned in just slightly, as if proximity might change what he was seeing, his jaw tightening again. But this time not from dismissal, from recognition, and the teller beside him inhaled softly, almost inaudibly, her eyes widening just enough to betray the shift, while the security guard near the entrance straightened fully now, no longer relaxed, his attention fixed entirely on the counter, sensing that whatever this was, it was no longer routine, and Marcus remained where he stood, unmoving, his hands at his sides, his gaze steady, not watching the screen, not watching the crowd, only Whitmore, as if the real moment was not in the data being revealed, but in the man processing it, the subtle collapse of certainty happening behind his eyes, and Whitmore blinked once, then again, slower this time, his lips parting slightly as if to speak, but no words came, only a faint exhale that seemed to carry more weight than any statement he could have made, and the room held its breath with him, suspended in that fragile instant where perception began to fracture, and reality quietly took its place. Whitmore did not move right away, his eyes still locked on the screen as if the numbers might rearrange themselves if he stared long enough, the faint glow reflecting across his face now revealing something far different from before, not authority, not certainty, but calculation, rapid and unsettled, his fingers resting lightly against the edge of the terminal while the silence around him deepened, thickened, pressing in from every direction as the people in the lobby began to sense that something had shifted beyond a simple misunderstanding, and he swallowed once, a small, controlled motion that failed to hide the tension building beneath his composed exterior. Then he straightened slightly, drawing in a breath that felt more deliberate than natural, and turned his attention back to Marcus, though not fully, not directly, as if meeting his eyes required more than he was ready to give. "There must be some kind of system error," he said, the words measured but lacking conviction. A statement offered more to protect his position than to explain what he had just seen, and Marcus did not interrupt, did not correct him. He simply watched, his expression unchanged, his silence now carrying a quiet pressure that made every word in the room feel heavier, more exposed. Whitmore glanced again at the screen, then at the card in his hand, then back to the screen, repeating the motion as if confirming reality through repetition, but each glance only seemed to deepen the unease. Settling in his posture, and behind the counter the teller shifted her weight, her hands hovering uncertainly over her keyboard, waiting for direction that did not come, while a man seated near the waiting area leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, no longer pretending not to watch, the tension pulling him in completely, and the security guard near. The door took a slow step closer, not intervening, just narrowing the distance, his presence now more intentional than passive. Whitmore exhaled again, longer this time, and reached for the keyboard, his fingers moving quickly, pulling up additional records, cross-checking details that only seconds ago he had deemed unnecessary, the soft clicking of keys breaking the silence in uneven bursts, each keystroke carrying a subtle urgency that contrasted sharply with his earlier dismissal, and as the information filled the screen his movements slowed, the rhythm of his typing faltering before stopping altogether, his hand hovering midair for a brief moment before lowering slowly to the counter. And he finally looked up, really looked this time, meeting Marcus's gaze directly for the first time since the card had been scanned, and something unspoken passed between them. Not confrontation, not anger, but recognition. The kind that does not need to be explained to be understood, and Whitmore's voice, when it came again, was quieter, stripped of its earlier sharpness. "Mr. Reed," he said, the name landing carefully, deliberately, as though saying it correctly now might somehow correct everything that had come before. But the shift came too late to undo the moment that had already unfolded, and Marcus tilted his head just slightly, acknowledging the change without reacting to it, his presence steady, grounded, unaffected by the rising tension around them. And Whitmore glanced down once more at the terminal, then back up, his lips pressing together briefly before he spoke again, slower this time. "I was not aware," he said, the sentence incomplete, hanging in the air without a clear ending, as if the rest of it could not be formed without unraveling everything that had just happened. And Marcus let the silence sit between them for a beat longer, not rushing to fill it, not offering relief, allowing the weight of the moment to settle fully, while the room remained still, every person now watching openly, no longer pretending this was anything but what it had become, a quiet unraveling of certainty, happening in real time, under bright lights that revealed more than they concealed. The air in the lobby did not move, not even with the quiet hum of the vents above, as Whitmore stood there holding the edge of the counter a little tighter than before, his knuckles faintly pale against the polished surface, while the terminal screen continued to glow with information he could no longer dismiss. And Marcus remained still, not stepping forward, not stepping back, simply allowing the moment to unfold without interference, his calm presence now standing in sharp contrast to the tension that had begun to ripple outward from the counter into every corner of the room. And somewhere behind him a phone screen lifted slightly, angled just enough to capture what was happening, though no one spoke, no one interrupted, as if the entire space understood instinctively that this was not a moment to be broken. Whitmore cleared his throat again, softer this time, and set the card down carefully, almost deliberately, as though the way he handled it now mattered more than it had just minutes ago, his eyes flicking briefly toward the ash still scattered across the counter before returning to Marcus. And there was something different in his posture now, a subtle shift away from authority and towards something more uncertain, more exposed. "I will need to contact corporate to verify this," he said, the sentence structured formally, but carrying an undercurrent of hesitation that had not been there before. And Marcus gave a slight nod, not in agreement, not in permission, just acknowledgement, his gaze steady, patient, as if time itself was no longer a factor for him. And Whitmore reached for the phone beside the terminal, his fingers pausing for a fraction of a second before dialing, the quiet beeps echoing faintly in the silence as he turned slightly away, lowering his voice, though not enough to disappear entirely, fragments of his conversation slipping into the open air. "Yes, this is Daniel Whitmore, branch manager. I have a client here. The account number is," his tone shifting again as he spoke, less certain, more careful, each word chosen with increasing precision, and the seconds stretched as he listened, his expression tightening, then stilling, then changing altogether, the confidence draining in slow, visible increments. And behind him the teller's hands dropped fully to her sides, her attention no longer divided, fully fixed on the unfolding call, while the security guard stopped moving altogether, his presence now anchored in place, observing without question. And Marcus exhaled quietly, a slow, controlled breath that did not break his composure, his eyes drifting for just a moment toward the glass doors where sunlight continued to spill across the floor, unchanged, indifferent to everything happening inside, before returning to Whitmore, who now stood completely still, the phone pressed to his ear, his lips parting slightly as if to respond, but then closing again, listening, absorbing, and then finally, "Yes, I understand," he said, the words barely above a whisper, his posture sinking just enough to be noticed, the weight of realization settling fully into place. And when he pulled the phone away from his ear, he did not hang up immediately, his gaze lingering on the blank space ahead of him before slowly lowering the device back onto its cradle, the small click sounding far louder than it should have. And he turned back toward Marcus, this time without hesitation, without deflection, his eyes meeting his directly, and whatever remained of the earlier certainty was gone, replaced by something quieter, something heavier. Mr. Reed. He began again. But this time the name carried something different, not authority, not formality, but recognition, and the room seemed to lean in closer without moving. Every person present now fully aware that whatever came next would not simply correct a mistake, but reveal something far deeper about the moment that had just passed. Whitmore's voice did not continue right away, and for a moment it seemed as though even he did not know how to finish the sentence he had started, his lips parting slightly before closing again as the weight of what he had just confirmed settled deeper into his posture. And Marcus did not rush him, did not fill the silence. He simply stood there with the same quiet steadiness, allowing the pause to stretch naturally, as if the truth did not need to be forced into the room because it was already there, visible in every subtle shift of expression, every glance that now lingered too long, and the lobby itself seemed to respond. The earlier tension dissolving into something slower, heavier, not loud, not chaotic, but reflective, as though the space had become aware of itself, of what had just happened within it, and the faint hum of the building returned to notice, the distant sound of a printer cycling, the soft click of a pen somewhere behind the counter, ordinary sounds that now felt sharper against the quiet. Whitmore finally exhaled, longer this time, and placed both hands flat on the counter, grounding himself as he looked directly at Marcus, no longer avoiding his gaze, no longer searching for an escape in procedure or protocol. "The account is verified," he said, his voice steady but subdued, stripped of its earlier authority, and the words carried outward into the room with a quiet finality that did not need to be repeated, and for a second no one moved, as if the confirmation itself required a moment to be understood, to be absorbed. And Marcus nodded once, slowly, not in triumph, not in satisfaction, just acknowledgement, his expression unchanged, his composure intact, while Whitmore's eyes flicked again toward the ash on the counter, the small gray remnants now more visible than before, no longer overlooked, no longer insignificant, and something in his expression tightened, not with defensiveness but with recognition, the realization of what had been done, not just procedurally, but personally, and he reached for a cloth from beneath the counter, hesitating briefly before using it to brush the ash aside, the motion careful, deliberate, as though trying to restore a surface that could not be fully returned to what it had been, and the soft scrape of fabric against stone echoed faintly in the silence, drawing quiet attention from those watching, and Marcus's gaze followed the movement for a moment, then lifted again, his posture unchanged, his presence calm in a way that did not diminish the gravity of the moment, but seemed to contain it. And Whitmore straightened slowly, placing the cloth aside, his hands now empty, his stance no longer rigid but no longer guarded either. And when he spoke again his voice carried something new, something that had not been present before. "I made an assumption," he said, the words simple, direct, without excuse or embellishment, and they settled into the room with a weight that did not demand reaction but invited reflection. And Marcus held his gaze for a brief second longer before responding, his voice quiet, measured. "Yes," he said, "nothing more, no lecture, no correction, just acknowledgement of what had already been revealed." And that single word seemed to land deeper than anything else that had been said, because it did not challenge, it did not accuse, it simply confirmed, and the room remained still, every person now fully aware that what had just unfolded was not only about a transaction or a mistake, but about something far more human, something that could not be undone by policy or procedure. And as the light from the front windows continued to stretch across the floor, unchanged and indifferent, the moment settled into a quiet understanding that no one in the room would leave unaffected. Whitmore did not look away this time, and that in itself marked the clearest shift in the room. His shoulders no longer squared in defense but held in a quieter, more grounded way, as if he had stepped out of the role he had been performing and into something more real, more accountable, and Marcus noticed it, not with surprise but with a kind of calm recognition, the same way he had observed everything else since the moment he walked in, without interruption, without escalation, simply allowing each layer to reveal itself. And the silence that followed his single word lingered just long enough to settle fully before Whitmore spoke again, his voice lower now, stripped of the polished edges it carried before. That should not have happened, he said, the statement directed at no one and everyone at once, his eyes briefly dropping to the counter before returning to Marcus. And there was no attempt to justify, no reference to policy, no appeal to misunderstanding, just the weight of the admission standing on its own. And Marcus remained still, his expression unchanged. But there was something in the way he held the moment that made it clear he was not here for the apology alone, not for the words, but for what came after them. And Whitmore seemed to understand that without being told, because he turned slightly toward the terminal again, his movements more careful now, more deliberate, pulling up the account details once more, verifying them not out of doubt, but out of responsibility, and the soft glow of the screen reflected faintly in his eyes as he read, then nodded to himself, a small, almost imperceptible motion that carried more weight than any earlier certainty, and he reached beneath the counter again, this time retrieving a fresh check processing form, placing it neatly in front of him, aligning it with precision before looking back at Marcus. "If you would allow me, I will process this correctly," he said, and the phrasing mattered, the shift from command to request, from assumption to permission, subtle but unmistakable, and Marcus studied him for a brief second, not evaluating the words but the intention behind them, then gave a slight nod, once again calm, once again measured, and Whitmore moved forward with the transaction, his hands steady but slower now, entering the information line by line, double-checking each entry before continuing, the quiet tapping of keys returning, but this time without urgency, without impatience, only focus, and the teller beside him relaxed slightly, though her attention remained fixed, aware that this was no longer a routine process but something that carried meaning beyond the numbers on the screen. And as Whitmore worked, the room began to breathe again, the tension easing just enough for small movements to return, a shift of weight here, a soft exhale there. But no one left, no one turned away, as if they all understood that they were witnessing something that would stay with them long after they walked out those doors. And Marcus stood where he was, hands at his sides, posture unchanged, not asserting control, not reclaiming power, simply existing in it. And after a moment Whitmore printed the receipt, the machine humming softly before releasing the paper, which he took carefully, smoothing it once before placing it on the counter, this time without hesitation, without distance, sliding it forward with a quiet, respectful motion. "Your transaction is complete, Mr. Reed," he said, and the words carried no excess, no performance, only clarity. And Marcus looked down at the receipt briefly, then back at Whitmore, his gaze steady, not triumphant, not forgiving, just present. And for a moment neither of them spoke, the space between them filled not with tension but with understanding, the kind that does not erase what happened but acknowledges it fully. And in that stillness, the entire room seemed to hold on to something unspoken, something that had shifted beneath the surface and would not easily return to what it had been before. Marcus did not reach for the receipt right away, and that pause carried more meaning than any immediate reaction could have, his eyes resting briefly on the paper before lifting again to meet Whitmore's, not searching, not pressing, simply present in a way that made the moment feel complete without needing to be explained. And Whitmore held that gaze, no longer guarded, no longer distant, as if he understood that what had just passed between them could not be reduced to a single transaction or corrected with a single action, his posture steady now but quieter, grounded in a different kind of awareness, and the faint reflection of the overhead lights softened across the counter between them, illuminating the space where the ash had been, now cleared but not forgotten. And Marcus finally reached forward, his movement unhurried, taking the receipt with a light grip, folding it once with care before slipping it into his jacket pocket, the fabric settling back into place as if nothing had happened, though everything had. And he gave a small nod, not formal, not dismissive, just acknowledgement, the kind that closed a moment without erasing it. And Whitmore inhaled slowly, his shoulders rising and falling with a controlled breath, as though steadying himself before speaking again. "I appreciate your patience," he said, the words simple but deliberate, no longer carrying the weight of obligation but of sincerity. And Marcus tilted his head slightly, considering the statement for a brief second, before responding, his voice calm, measured, "Patience is easy when you know what is true," he said, and the sentence settled into the room with a quiet clarity that extended beyond the exchange itself, reaching into the awareness of everyone listening. And for a moment no one moved. Not the teller, not the guard, not the customers who had forgotten their own transactions. As if the space itself had paused to absorb the meaning behind the words, and Whitmore nodded slowly, not out of agreement, alone but out of understanding, his gaze dropping once more to the counter before lifting again. And there was no attempt to prolong the interaction, no effort to recover control of the moment, only a quiet acceptance of it. And Marcus turned slightly then, his body angling toward the exit, the sunlight from the glass doors catching along the edge of his jacket, outlining his figure in a soft glow as he took his first step away from the counter, his pace steady, unhurried, each movement deliberate but without weight, as though he carried nothing with him except the same calm presence he had brought in. And as he passed through the lobby, the space seemed to shift subtly around him, conversations not yet resumed, eyes following, but no longer with curiosity or judgment, only with a kind of quiet reflection. And the security guard stepped back just enough to clear the path without drawing attention to the gesture, his posture respectful, while the teller behind the counter exhaled softly, her shoulders lowering as the tension finally released, and Whitmore remained where he was, watching Marcus cross the distance toward the doors, not calling out, not interrupting, simply observing as the man moved through the light and into the open space beyond. And when the doors parted and then closed again with a soft, measured sound, the lobby did not immediately return to normal. It lingered in that stillness for a few seconds longer, as if something invisible had been left behind, something that would not easily fade. And Whitmore stood there, his reflection faintly visible in the polished surface of the counter, no longer the same as it had been before, not because of what had been said, but because of what had been seen and understood. Outside, the afternoon light stretched across the sidewalk in long, warm lines, the faint sound of traffic blending with distant voices as Marcus stepped onto the concrete, the glass doors closing softly behind him without drawing attention. And he did not look back, not because he needed to prove anything, but because there was nothing left inside that required his presence, his pace steady as he moved forward, each step measured, unhurried, his shadow trailing just behind him in the sunlight. While inside the lobby the stillness lingered, not frozen, but quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as though the space itself was holding on to the moment a little longer before letting it go. And Whitmore remained at the counter, his hands resting lightly against the surface, his gaze no longer fixed on the doors but lowered slightly, reflecting inward rather than outward, the polished stone beneath his fingertips cool and smooth, unchanged, yet carrying the memory of what had taken place upon it. And the teller beside him shifted softly, glancing at him once before returning to her station, her movements slower now, more thoughtful, as if the routine tasks that followed carried a different weight than before. And one by one the customers began to move again, not abruptly, not loudly, but gradually, conversations returning in low tones, footsteps resuming across the marble floor, the ordinary rhythm of the bank reassembling itself piece by piece, though something subtle had changed. In the way people held themselves, in the way their eyes lingered just a moment longer, on details they might have once overlooked. And Whitmore straightened slowly, drawing in a quiet breath, his posture no longer rigid but not entirely at ease either, as if he were standing in a space that looked the same but felt different. And his gaze drifted to the terminal screen, now idle, its glow faint against the ambient light, then to the place where the ash had been, now cleared but not erased from memory. And he reached out, not to fix, not to correct, but simply to rest his hand flat against the counter again, grounding himself in the present moment. And for a brief second his reflection caught in the polished surface, faint but visible, and he held it there, not out of vanity, but recognition, the quiet understanding that what he had seen in Marcus had revealed something about himself he could not unsee. And beyond the glass doors the world continued as it always had, cars passing, people moving, sunlight shifting inch by inch across the pavement, indifferent to what had unfolded inside, yet somehow connected to it all the same. And Marcus walked on without interruption, blending into that movement with the same calm presence he carried within the bank. Not elevated, not diminished, simply steady, and as the distance between him and the building grew, the reflection of the bank's logo in the glass faded from his path, replaced by the open street ahead, while inside, the last trace of silence settled into something quieter, something lasting, not spoken, not written, but felt, in the way a moment of truth leaves its imprint long after the words have disappeared. And in that quiet, the bank stood unchanged in structure, yet altered in meaning, its walls holding not just transactions and numbers, but the echo of a single moment that had revealed more than anyone expected, and would remain, long after the doors opened and closed again, as a reminder carried not in policy, but in memory.